Hello, my name is Daniel Yuck. Thank you for joining today. I appreciate you, your time, and your support. In today's video, I want to share with you how I go about floating my tattoo needle. I want to give you some tips and tricks that I use to go about accomplishing this throughout my tattooing. If you have any questions, I encourage you to drop a comment down below. I'm going to do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do also have social medias under the same name as my YouTube. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would appreciate the support over there as well. With that being said, let's get right on into this. I recently made a video on the adversities of riding the tube, so I wanted to make this follow-up video to give you a little bit more insight on how we can go about floating the needle. I will leave the riding the tube video in the description below and in a card up here for you, so you can check it out on your end. Are you wanting to develop your tattooing skill sets? Now you can practice and develop anytime, any place with an assortment of tattooing workbooks that I've created. With these assorted tattooing workbooks, we can practice our basic lining all the way to advanced lining. We can practice shading, shading placement, dot work, textures, and more. All we are going to need is a tattoo workbook of mine. We can use a pencil, pen. We can even use a tattoo machine with a ballpoint cartridge to develop our tattooing abilities further. That means that we don't need tattoo ink, we don't need napkins or petroleum jelly to get to practicing. Simply open one of my tattooing workbooks and get going. It really is that easy. You can get your hands on one of my developmental tattooing assorted workbooks by simply clicking the links in my description or in the pinned comment section below, or navigating on over to Amazon.com, typing in Daniel Yuck, and you'll see all of the assorted tattoo workbooks that I've created come up. If you have an Amazon account, be sure to follow my Amazon author page as well, as I would greatly appreciate your support. Should you have any questions at all, drop them in the comment section down below. I will do my best to assist you in the best possible direction. With that being said, let's get right back into this video. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using a small piece of real skin, fake skin. I'm going to be using the Frequency Master OG Produce tattoo machine. I'm also going to be using the Rhein standard 9-round shader tattoo needle as well. And this is what I'm going to be using for this demonstration. I will be leaving my Amazon affiliate links and other affiliate links for you in the description below, so you can check out the gear featured in this video on your end. When it comes to floating the needle, there's one important variable that I am considering, or actually a few, but the first important variable that I'm considering is my setting of my needle. I always want to make sure that I have my needle set to an appropriate depth that's going to benefit my workflow as the artist. So you can see right here that my needle is about that much sticking out. That's about how much my needle is hanging out. This right here is a little bit on the excessive end. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just bring it in a couple of notches. And I'm going to find a comfortable setting here. So right around here is where I feel like it's pretty comfortable. And this is going to be personal preference right here in terms of how far you want your needle hanging out. Is going to be 110% solely up to you. It's going to be different for every artist. Some artists don't like to hang their needle out as much, some do. Now, there could be a few adversities when we hang our needle out this much. If our needle doesn't retract all the way back in, then we're not going to get adequate ink flow. So we have to really mess with this setting and fine tune it and really find what fits us best. So if you notice that where your ink isn't coming out but you do have ink in here, it's because the needle isn't going all the way back into the tube there. So we needed to do that. The only way to find the perfect setting is to kind of trial and error. So you want to start somewhere, and for me, I like to begin with my needle hanging out quite a bit, and then if I need to, I kind of adjust from there. And the reason why I hang out my needle this much is so that way I can see where my needle tip is landing when I'm applying any sort of design. I always need to be able to see where my needle tip is and how much ink I'm depositing in order to do a tattoo to the best of my abilities. That's just how my workflow goes. I'm not sure if a lot of tattoo artists are going to be like that, but for me, I have to see where I'm going. And to see where I'm going without experiencing a lot of pulling, I do that by hanging out my needle a little bit more. Let's say if we don't hang out our needle, then what a needle is going to look like is something similar to this here. Let me make sure I'm on camera here. So when we have our needle like around here, like I mentioned in the riding the tube video, there's going to be a number of adversities that we're going to experience that are going to make our workflow harder. So the difference is, this is a needle where we would likely ride the tube. That's the needle depth setting of riding a tube, and floating the needle probably like right around here. So the setting of your needle really does matter and is going to go a long way and contribute to the overall workflow. I can't really exhaust how important this part of the setup is. Not only do we have to be comfortable with the gear, but we have to really be in tune with this setting right here. I feel like oftentimes we overlook this little detail right here that's going to really contribute to the overall workflow when it comes to floating the needle. So don't underlook this. Pay special attention to the setting that you use in terms of how far you want to hang out your needle, as it is going to contribute. Let me go ahead and show you now. As I mentioned in the writing of the tube video, it's essentially pressing down until the tube touches the skin, and then we kind of work off that. Well, floating the needle is pretty much the exact opposite of that. What we're going to do is we're going to use our ability to identify needle depth and then just keep the very tip of the needle in the skin and hold a consistent needle depth throughout the line or the tattooing process. That is essentially floating the needle. So let me repeat that. When we float the needle, all it is, it's essentially where the tip of the needle goes into the skin and it stays at a consistent depth from point A to B until we are done applying the tattoo. When it comes to floating the needle, it could be very intimidating, especially if we're just starting, which is why a lot of people tend to write the tube at first. I would recommend going straight to practicing floating the needle, as it'll serve you better in the long run. So some tips that we can use to float the needle are learning how to identify the needle tips. So learning how to identify the needle tip is going to be a little something like this. So let's say, for example, I'm about to create this line from A to B. Before I start lining here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put the very tip of the needle into the skin and kind of see some behavior. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more ink flow here. So you can see that I'm getting some ink flow there, and that all the needles are hitting together, which is leaving a point that's representing 9 points for the 9-round shader that I'm using. So if I were you, I would practice this first. Get comfortable with simply letting the needle catch the skin like so. You can see that all the ink is going through the tube there, so my setting is a bit okay there. But you can see here that I'm just using the very tip of the needle to create a sort of needle point of the 9 needles there. And this is going to make sense here in a moment, but you're going to see that I do this over and over, and all I'm doing is I'm getting comfortable with the idea of the needle catching into the skin. This is going to be very important. The needle has to have time to catch into the skin if we're going to produce any sort of saturated, clean, consistent results. So you can see here that all of these little dots that I'm implementing, or I'm sorry, all of these little markings that I'm implementing here are hitting all together. We can see the needle points working in unison, and they're all hitting flat together. So this right here is essentially the beginning of floating the needle. I would recommend doing this for a few rolls until you get used to it. So the idea is to let the needle tip catch, and then once you feel it catch, go on to the next one. This is the beginning of what floating the needle is going to feel like, and I feel like the more comfortable that we get, the more cleaner our results are going to be. The idea is to get comfortable with the needles puncturing and penetrating the top layers of the skin, and that's it. That's all we're doing right now. So you can see that I'm going to go ahead and do this a couple more times. And I know that this may not make sense, but believe it or not, I feel like this is a beginning step to floating our needle. So let me wipe away and show you the results that I am working with. So you can see that each one of these markings has the 9-round shader marking grooves and all of the little details there. You can see basically all the 9 points hitting together, and each dot is consistently hitting together. I'm not getting inconsistent dots. More or less, they are all looking like dots hitting with the 9 points. I know, again, this may not be making sense, but this is very important. I'm going to be explaining to you why. So let's say if I didn't focus on, with the right angles and trying to get into the skin the right way, what I'm going to be doing is it's going to look a little something like this. So let me see if I can try to kind of make some mistakes here. See, so if we're not mindful of the needle points catching into the skin, and if we don't know what to look for, the results that we're going to get are going to be something like this. So you can see that none of these, besides this one, none of these look like they represent a 9-round shader. This is exactly how we lose our line weight integrity, and this is exactly how a design can come out different from what we may have envisioned. This right here, again, could lead to a lot of I guess, adversities when we are floating the needle. We have to know how to float the needle correctly. And this can happen in any angle. It doesn't have to be the ones that I demonstrated here. It can be this way. Basically what I'm saying is this can happen to any tattoo artist. But you can see though that without knowing how to introduce the needle to the skin, I'm only going to accomplish inconsistent results. We have to hit the skin evenly with the correct angle at the correct depth. And that's all we're practicing right now. So allow me to show you again. So you can see all 9 points are hitting together. I have adequate ink flow. I'm going to the right depth. And I'm using the very tip of the needle. Allow me to clean this up and then show you these results. So first and foremost, you can see that all of them are round and representing a 9 round shader. This is where we want to get. I'm going to encourage you to practice this for a few moments and then until the point where you get every single point down like this, where you're representing the line weight that you were using. So the reason that we're doing that is because this is the first step to floating the needle. Stay with me here. Once we get acquainted with that idea of floating the needle until we're hitting all 9 points correctly, then we can move on to the second phase here. The second phase is going to be staying at a consistent needle depth while creating a smaller line. So essentially, now that we're more familiar with implanting all 9 needles together, we're going to start moving it to create a line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what I just practiced. I'm going to give the needle enough time to catch into the skin. From there, I'm going to identify my needle depth, and then I'm just going to match my hand speed to voltage so that way I can accomplish clean, smooth lines. So let me show you. I'm going to go ahead and let the needles catch. Once they do, I go to the correct needle depth. And then from there, I move at the correct hand speed and voltage, and you can see that my tube never comes close to touching the skin, but I'm accomplishing clean, solid, saturated lines. Let me see if I can turn my cart this way to show you that I'm not riding the tube here. Let me go ahead and get a little bit more ink so that way I have adequate ink flow. So the 9 points touch down, the right needle depth, hand speed to voltage, and you can see I'm very far away from riding the tube, but I'm still accomplishing clean, solid, saturated results. If we're not familiar with being able to catch the needle into the skin, then we're probably just going to kind of move with this sort of like conductivity where just because we don't know how the needle's catching into the skin, we don't know how the needle's depositing, which is why I recommend getting used to doing just dots like this, as I mentioned earlier. So that way you can see how long it takes for the needle to deposit the ink, and you can kind of use that to help you gauge how fast you're going to need to be moving. As you can see, it really doesn't take much time for the needle to start depositing ink, but we do have to leave it there a little bit for it to deposit the ink. So you can see that we really do have to fine tune this balance. I know floating the needle may seem a bit difficult, but once we start practicing with like practical exercises, it really does become doable and something that's second nature. For me now, floating the needle is second nature, and it's not something that I think about or have to put much thought into just because it's so second nature to me now. However, when I first started, the story was opposite of that. I'm going to go ahead and do this again. So you can see that I moved too fast here. My needle depth was wrong. My angle was off as well. I'm going to go ahead and go back. I'm going to let the needle catch. I'm going to go to the correct needle depth, and then I'm going to move my hand with my hand speed to my voltage. There we go. So you can see every line that I'm creating is nice, clean, solid, saturated, and consistent. More importantly, I am floating the needle and I'm not riding the tube. This exercise that I'm sharing with you on its own is super simple. However, mastering floating the needle is going to be a little bit more of a task. So be patient with yourself, just practice it. There's no way around it but through it. You have to go through the motions, you have to get acquainted, and you have to get used to applying lines with floating the needle. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of do this a couple more times here so we can conclude this video. So keep in mind, you want to get comfortable with the points touching down and hitting all together, because once we have this sort of look, then we know we're at least at the correct angle, and we're going to come out with lines that are true to the integrity of the line weight that we chose at the very least. Okay, so when we move on to the second part where we start, getting into the needle depth and the hand speed to voltage, that's also going to come into play to finalize the entire design. So from here, I'm going to repeat. So I let my needle catch as we did above. hand speed to voltage, needle depth consistent, and I stay like that until I am done, as you can see. I'm gonna go ahead and repeat. And you can see that the tube never comes close to touching the skin. That right there, in a nutshell, is how I go about floating the needle. There's really not much more to it other than these basic fundamentals here that I'm sharing with you. I think it's just more difficult to put it into action and master it than to understand it. I feel like understanding what floating the needle is only half the battle, and then getting comfortable with floating the needle is the other part of the battle that we are going to go through. This is going to apply in any direction. It doesn't matter what direction we are moving. So let's say, for example, if I go right here, my angle is correct, I hit the right needle depth, and then I match my hand speed to my voltage. And you can see each and every time I'm gonna achieve clean, solid, consistent, saturated lines. But not only that, more importantly, I'm going to achieve clean, solid, consistent, saturated lines in correspondence to the line weight that I chose, which is everything. That's super important. If we pick a 9-round shader, the lines should look like a 9-round shader did them. What I'm sharing with you here in this video can be applied to any size needle. It doesn't matter the needle size. This is essentially for every single needle grouping and configuration. I use the 9-round shader because it'd be easier to get my points across. But for example, here is a bug pin 5-round liner, and I'm going to show you that it's essentially the same process. So I'm going to hang out my needle quite a bit to where I am comfortable. For this 5-round liner, it's going to be right here. And then from here, I'm going to use the exact same technical application that I've been sharing with you to create this line. So you can see that I'm going to do a little bit of dots here to kind of see how the needle behaves. Keep in mind, since we're using a smaller needle, it's going to be easier for this needle to open and penetrate the skin. So therefore, we have to lower our voltage and we have to be a little bit more mindful of the technical application. However, the approach still stays the same. So it looks as though I'm achieving dots here that are true to the line weight integrity. What I'm going to do is make sure I touch down at the correct angle, and then I'm going to move my needle from point A to B, like so. And again, that's going to be with every single needle. The only thing that really changes is the needle size, the voltage that we may use, and that's pretty much it. In terms of needle depth, it's all pretty much to the same depth. Some needles just are easier to get to those depths than others. The smaller the needle, I feel like the easier it's going to be to penetrate the skin. So you want to kind of keep that into consideration when you are applying any design with a smaller needle, just to prevent any sort of unwanted trauma. But you can see, even with the 5-round liner, it's still going to be the same process. Nothing changes from needle configuration. And this would even be for mags, round mags, specialty needles. All of the needles are going to have the same approach. Floating the needle, for me, is a better way to go. It does not matter what needle I am using. So that's how I get more comfortable with where I need to be to float the needle, by just simply applying dots like so, the way that you see me doing here. But again, as I mentioned, it's going to be the exact same thing with every single needle configuration that we use. You always want to set your needle depth. Make sure that you're comfortable with the needle touching down at the correct angle. Make sure you match your hand speed to your voltage and stay at the consistent needle depth throughout the entire process. Here's another quick example. So here is a round mag. I'm going to kind of show you that it's the same thing. So you can see that I've just been lining and doing a little bit of dot work up until now. So now I'm going to do a little bit of packing. You can see that I'm hanging out my needle quite a bit. Same thing that I have been doing because I like to float my needle. And then I'm going to approach it the same way. Keep in mind, if I'm not getting adequate ink flow, then I just simply adjust my setting a couple of notches inwards to help the ink flow a bit better. But you can see that it's the same thing. I never ride the tube. Allow me to show you this way. Even with the round mag, if I'm going to be packing, I want to make sure that I'm comfortable with the needle touching down at the way that I'm touching down. So you can see that this is the way that I'm going to be packing, at this angle like this. So you can see that each time I touch down, I'm typically touching down with the entire needle, which is what I am going for. That's what I want. So with that right there, I have the correct needle hang. I do have the correct depth here, and I do have the correct, you know, angle and all of that. So I have all the basics lined up. So from here, I can kind of put this to the test by beginning to pack. And you can see, not once do I ever get close to riding the tube. And this is essentially floating the needle. It really doesn't get much more complex than this. It's a simple concept. It just takes a bit of time to master. Let me go ahead and show you here. Even if I were to go this way, you can see that I never get close to riding the tube because I am floating the needle. Here is a close-up look at all of the results, and you can see where I was letting the needle touch down first and practicing are very consistent, and you can see that the results that I got are also nice, clean, solid, saturated, and consistent. Same thing with the 5-round liner. It took me a little bit to warm up, but I got warmed up to that needle. And then the same thing with the round mag. I wanted to give you a close-up look at these results. Feel free to screenshot this so that way you can kind of remember when you are learning to float the needle, to practice letting the needle tip go into the skin and just to see and get acquainted with the behavior and how the needle interacts with the skin. I feel like this first part is very, very crucial to understanding how to float the needle correctly. Now, I feel like this is also a great place to conclude this video. However, should you have any questions at all, I'm going to encourage you to please drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do also have social medias under the same name as my YouTube. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would appreciate your support. With that being said, I appreciate your time and I thank you for watching. You have a great day. Are you needing or wanting tattoo guidance? What about 4K high quality step-by-step follow-along tattoo sessions? Or maybe one-on-one tattoo support to get answers to your questions that are specifically tailored to your wants and needs as the artist? You can now become a Patreon where you will gain access to high quality 4K exclusive step-by-step follow-along tattoo sessions. I will be tattooing with you in a one-on-one step-by-step manner where I will be explaining what I am doing and why every step of the way. I will also be doing this in a high quality 4K format for your optimal viewing experience. On top of the one-on-one support and on top of the step-by-step tattoo session guidance, you will also gain access to exclusive tattoo stencils that you can download and place on your end to further develop your skill sets. I will leave a link for you in the description or in the pinned comment section below, or you can head on over to patreon.com/Daniel Yuck. When you become a Patreon, you will be getting one-on-one support where you can ask me as many questions as you'd like that are specifically tailored to your wants and needs as the artist. You will gain access to exclusive tattoo stencils that you can download and practice on your end. You'll also gain access to exclusive high quality 4K footage where I walk you through each and every tattoo session in a one-on-one step-by-step manner where I explain all the what's and whys along the way. Become a Patreon today. Thank you for your support in advance. I greatly appreciate you.